Mysterious Universe, Season 23, Episode 23. Coming up on the show, we've got The Curse of Gozu, giant beavers, and live blogging your alien abduction. I'm Benjamin Grundy, joining me is Aaron Wright.
Giant beavers.
You like the emphasis I put on giant beavers there?
I did sense the emphasis, yes.
A huge segment coming up. It's taken a lot of work, 2 weeks in the planning.
About giant beavers.
Yeah, I feel like I've spent my whole life podcasting to prepare for this giant beavers segment.
Okay, well, I'm going to go into something a little bit different, so I'll just skip over that quite quickly. Actually, I'm really looking forward to this because on the Plus show this week, I was talking just briefly about some experiences people have had with basically dabbling in the occult, but it's not even playing with an Ouija board late at night or, trying to summon a demon. It's just simply reading a book about occult phenomena can lead you to opening doors to something. And when I say something, that's in inverted commas. You bring about some type of force that decides that it wants to meddle in your life.
I came across that today. I was reading some stuff from Brent Rains. I actually sent you the article. Did you end up using it?
Yes, I've got a couple of highlights out of there, actually.
A little story of Brent doing his research back in the day, and someone told him he was having these weird Men in Black experiences, and Brent kind of said, look, have you changed anything in your life? Are you doing anything occult that might attract them? And the guy was like, no, I just, get up and go to work and live my life. Everything's normal. And then Brent ends up going over to his house and goes down to his basement, and there's a giant pentagram on the ground. There's like occult symbols all over the walls.
It's like, look, occasionally I just dabble in the occult, but why should that mean that I'm going to have high strangeness occurring to me?
Oh, this pentagram. This was here when we moved in. This isn't mine.
But that's actually the point of my segment is that, look, you don't actually have to have a pentagram in your basement and engaging in satanic practices to allow this stuff to come through. And it seems to be quite ubiquitous. It's in basically anyone who starts looking at these topics, they show up on the radar of these entities and strange things start to happen to them. So I've also got a story from Japan which involves a curse.
Gozu.
Yes, Gozu, a curse that relates to some cryptozoological entity that appeared and then ends up cursing people through a poem, which I'm not going to read for you. I'll put it on the website so you can read it for yourself. But beware, if you read it, bad things may happen to you.
It's a shame that you're not reading Japanese poetry on the show.
I know.
What a shame.
It's such a letdown. It is a definite letdown.
Speaking of cryptozoology, do you remember the book Cowboys and Saurians?
Yeah, how can I forget?
From September last year. It was a book from John LeMay. He's a fantastic writer. He goes
Hasn't
through...
he written a couple of books?
Well, the other one he did was Cowboys and UFOs, or Cowboys and Saucers.
Yeah.
He finds these old accounts from the 1800s, old newspaper reports, and paints a picture of this high strangeness from the Old West. And he's got a new one. This is a follow-up, Cowboys and Saurians Ice Age edition.
Oh.
So it's kind of a follow-up to that Cowboys and Saurians book we mentioned last year, but he's focusing on, megafauna.
Yes,
like
right.
Mammoths and saber-toothed tigers.
And hence giant beavers.
And giant beavers. Mm-hmm. So I started going into this. This was really fun. The first one is giant beavers. But, it's not really...
I don't know why you're laughing. I don't understand the...
No, I'm not trying to do any innuendo or anything. It's just kind of funny because of how much of a letdown the whole giant beavers segment is.
So you're saying a giant beaver is a letdown?
Yeah, well, I was hoping, there'd be tales of a giant beaver ripping a man apart or something, but there's actually nothing like that.
Building a giant dam?
He says, imagine a beaver as big as a bear. Yes, at one time there were giant beavers. They died out at the same time as the mammoths around 10,000 years ago, but according to the reports, it seems as though maybe some of them have survived. And he starts going back to all these early records. So one of the earliest is from Canada in 1808, and Alexander Henry the Younger was it's a weird name, was exploring the Red River in Manitoba, and there he met a native Saulteaux, which is a native tribe, who told him a story of a giant beaver, which Henry recorded in his diary. So I'm reading this going, here we go, here's the first giant beaver story. And it literally consists of the man writing in his diary, the Indian told me it was a giant beaver.
The end.
That's it. There was a
headline bit.
There was a little bit more information. The Indian saw the beaver swim past his canoe, and the beaver was very big. But that's the end of the giant beaver story. He also mentions that the Ute Indian tribe had a tale of a large beaver eating a man whole.
Well, that's better. We're stepping it up a bit.
A little bit better. And the Shoshone tribe also claim a giant beaver appeared during a great snowstorm back in 1830. But essentially all the giant beaver stories were, it was a beaver and it was very large. The end. So let's move on to something a bit more interesting. He had a great chapter on saber-toothed tigers.
Yeah.
And I was hoping that we might have something that would lend credence to one of Nick Redfern's old reports.
Like with the spectral saber-toothed tigers?
Yeah, well, there was a woman who contacted him and told him that she was out walking with her dog, just this little chihuahua, and the dog started flipping out. It basically fell on the ground and played dead, like it was catatonic with fear. And when she picked the dog up, she noticed it was staring at something, and she turned to look, and she saw a saber-toothed cat. This saber-toothed tiger walking through the forest. But the odd thing about the encounter was that half of its body was transparent.
Yes, I recall that story. Incredible.
So it was like a ghost saber-toothed tiger. But this chapter was interesting because it mentions Idaho Bill. Now, Idaho Bill, he was kind of like the 1920s Joe Exotic, like the 1920s Tiger King.
What, did he try and murder a competitor or something?
Basically, they found a USB stick in the 1920s where he was having sex with all the tigers.
That's so bad.
But the weird thing about the saber-toothed cat stories or the cryptozoological stuff is that most of them are from Mexico. Like if you look at the cryptid cat reports that have saber teeth, a lot of it's linked to this legend of the Onza. It's this cryptid from Mexico. And there are some modern reports. So he points out that in 1994, a saber-toothed cat was spotted in northern Mexico by a Roberto Gutierrez. This is according to an article in the issue of Science Illustre in 1998. To the north in New Mexico, a man named Jerry Padilla claimed that a late relative of his had seen one on a mountain road in the northern part of the state in 1946. But the most interesting story came courtesy of Carl Schuker, and in his book, Still in Search of Prehistoric Survivors. He wrote that in June 2016, Richard Muirhead sent him a series of newspaper articles, and it was about a mysterious, unidentified animal that he speculates might have been a living saber-toothed tiger from Mexico. So the article, again, it's a very early one. It ran in August of 1928 in this issue of the Morning Oregonian. And it was the story of this Wild West showman from, the early 1900s. His name was Colonel Barney Idaho Bill Pearson. And he rolled up to the offices of the paper with this massive wagon attached to his horses that was completely covered in tarps. And according to the story, the newsmen who actually wrote the article, they lifted back the tarps and were snarled at by a saber-toothed cat. He had some saber-toothed cat. Now, he went on to claim that he captured it in the southwest of Mexico about 3 months ago. He explained he was taking it east to Washington, D.C., and his story was he wanted to get it classified by science because he knew he had captured something that shouldn't exist. It should be extinct. So they said in the article it weighs 800 pounds. It kind of looks like a combination of a tiger, lion, and cougar.
800 pounds?
It was huge, this thing. It growls like all of them together. It has claws like a cat, stripes like a tiger, a square kind of snout, shaggy hair around its shoulders, but the most important detail, it's got tusks in its mouth. Now, John LeMay, the author of Cowboys and Saurians Ice Age, found a follow-up article from August the 18th of 1928 where it said the animal was twice as large as a mountain lion. It had a peculiar beard, markings of a tiger. The ears resembled those of a gorilla. And it said the colonel expects the animal, which he captured in southern Mexico, will be identified at the zoological gardens. Now, he went on to explain to this particular journalist that it took six of his men to capture the beast. 2 of them were killed. And on the trip east, he was only traveling during the daytime because he didn't want some kind of mishap in the darkness and for this beast to escape. So did 1920s Joe Exotic, the Tiger King of the Roaring 20s, make it to Washington, D.C.?
Yeah, what happened to it? Because, one thing that gets my attention there is the description that it had ears like a gorilla. That's not consistent with what we know of saber-toothed tigers. It sounds like it's...
Isn't it?
No, saber-toothed tigers don't have gorilla ears.
What, are you looking at some cartoon image on the internet?
Well, I'm just looking at artist recreations of what they thought saber-toothed tigers would be, and it would be more consistent with a cat-like creature as opposed to a gorilla.
Well, this guy had a saber-toothed tiger, so maybe he's more inclined to know the details.
Or maybe he's a traveling salesman trying to get a little bit of attention.
Well, to answer the question of did he make it to Washington, D.C., the answer is probably no, because they found an article November the 28th, 1930, and it basically said his truck became overturned, the animal escaped. But the problem in this article is when Pearson, Idaho Joe, when he was quoted, he described the animal that escaped as feline-like, but it resembled a gorilla. And he called it...
Yeah, it sounds chimeric.
And he called it his pet. He furthermore claimed that it was not dangerous. So as that article messed it up in saying, like, did he just say it had gorilla-like ears? Or was the first article messing it up that it actually was gorilla-like?
Well, maybe it was an escaped gorilla with, very long fangs. It's like maybe some dental abnormality and the article's gotten it wrong. It's a real creature.
How would he get a gorilla from Mexico? That doesn't make sense either.
Well, if someone smuggled it in, it's exotic. I mean, even if it's the 1920s, circuses would bring things in.
But the author LeMay said that this was 2 years after the initial report that he had a saber-toothed tiger, so it's possible something else happened to the saber-toothed tiger and then he had an entirely different creature.
Yeah, that's a possibility as well.
So,
but what's the odds of that?
Well, John did manage to confirm that Idaho Bill was a real guy. There was a ton of articles about him, lots of press about his exploits in the 1920s. He said some of it was encouraging, some of it was discouraging. The discouraging aspects were that he was basically like Joe Exotic. He was a massive showman. He really just cared about, getting the craziest animals and bringing in the most people.
Was he a polygamist?
I don't know. That information is not available, but he claimed he rode with Billy the Kid in his younger days. So he had a bit of a gunslinging outlaw reputation.
Also in context of Joe Exotic, that's not very good either.
Well, essentially he was a massive attention seeker.
Yeah.
But then you think, well, someone that goes around trying to capture exotic animals and show them off, I mean, that's obvious. Of course he's going to be an attention seeker.
This is what comes to mind, though, especially, and this is really dangerous when we cover these stories that come from old newspaper reports, and I do come across it quite frequently, is that there is a risk that it was kind of like a sensationalized kind of thing to do at the time, that you would publish these crazy stories to get attention for something. And it's like, it even got out of control for him or out of hand. So the way to get rid of it is, oh, my thing crashed and it escaped. Oh, no, I don't know. I really had it.
Well, there were favorable articles about him that corroborated the story.
Oh, okay.
So there were details that appeared in December the 12th in 1923. There was a page 7 report on the Logan Sport Morning Press that told a story of how he delivered wild animals to the White House. So it said, R.B. Pearson, Colonel Idaho Bill, rolled into the White House a week ago to present President Coolidge with a brace of wild bears. So this Joe Exotic just showed up at the White House. Coolidge was like, oh, great, I love these animals, bring him in.
What are you going to do?
And all these bears come out. They're doing tricks and balancing on balls. And apparently Coolidge, who never smiled, he never cracked a smile, he loved it. He absolutely loved this display of these crazy wild bears doing tricks.
It's all good, though, until it takes your face off.
Well, it's said in the article that Coolidge enjoyed the presentation immensely. He's a man who seldom smiles, but he was enjoying it with the enthusiasm of a schoolboy. And then all the bears will be turned over to the National Zoological Park. So there was another representative quoted in this article that said Idaho Joe used a particular vehicle and it traveled 4,000 miles, a total of 100,000 miles on hunting trips.
Right.
In this particular, so there was some kind of verification through Mexico. There was verification that he was going to Mexico, and there is this, legend. There are legends of this saber-toothed cat in the region, so it kind of adds up. And he had the reputation to get an audience with the president.
But Mexico had grizzly bears apparently at one point. So they were they're extinct now, but it looks like they're up until 1899.
Yeah, they're probably extinct because he was just going and getting them.
Yeah, but grizzly bears are pretty aggressive. I don't understand why you just march onto the White House lawn with a whole heap of grizzly bears and...
Not for Idaho Joe.
No, obviously not.
So the other one that came out that was kind of interesting was the southern sarcastodon of Georgia. Now, a sarcastodon It was a large Ice Age mammal, and it kind of looked like a huge bear, but with a long, really long, bushy tail, like a cat.
Oh,
It's really strange.
I'm looking it up.
It was about 10 feet long, if not including the tail. And
It is a cat bear.
yeah, it obviously went on all fours. It was big. It was about 6 feet tall when it was on all fours. And they were carnivorous, cat-like. They were kind of like hyenas in a way, really bear-like hyenas.
Yeah.
And in the year 1897, where the next report is from, in Fletcherville, Georgia, no one would have known about this creature because it wasn't discovered, or its fossils weren't discovered until the 1930s in Mongolia. But fair enough, there was this report from Fletcherville, 1897 in February, in the Thomasville Times Enterprise, and the beast described kind of sounds like a sarcastodon. So as the story goes, it had killed a number of dogs, maimed a number of dogs, and the article stated it's also said that it killed a fine fat calf the other night. Part of the calf was found, but both the hind quarters were missing. And later there's a description from an eyewitness. It's a black man walking along. It's very specific about the fact that he had a fur hat and an umbrella, which was quite unique at the time. This guy sees this creature cross his path at night, and he describes it essentially as a giant bear with a strange face and a giant, long, cat-like tail. 4 years earlier, a similar creature was sighted near Atlanta. The Atlanta Constitution published the following account, March 18th, 1893. It had the headline, Mysterious Dog Killer. A mysterious animal attacked and killed dogs in the Atlanta suburb of West End in the first weeks of March. It said over a 3-day period, no fewer than 6 were slain, 2 of them mostly devoured. On 3 occasions, each of them at dusk, witnesses saw or thought they saw the killer, and twice it was fired upon without any effect. One witness said its outline was that of an enormous bear. Another witness said the creature looked like a large Newfoundland dog, but a third swore it was a hyena. So a couple of things are apparent there, and a hunting party was set out, but they couldn't find anything. First of all, shooting it with no apparent effect. This is, and we just spoke to Joshua Cutchin a couple of weeks ago and Timothy Renner with their new book, and we spoke about Sasquatch reports where people have clearly fired upon the creature.
And hit.
And there's no effect.
Yep.
Remember the story we covered at the start of that episode where it almost sounded like
from Pennsylvania,
bullets plopping into a lake?
Yeah.
That was the sound it made when it hit the creature. It just didn't sound like a normal physical thing. You get the sense that it might be something similar here because they're firing on the creature and nothing's happening. Nearly 30 years later in Arizona, there was another possible sarcastodon sighting. This was in the Huachuca Mountains. And this is in the same area because the last time we spoke about John LeMay's book with Cowboys and Saurians, the first book, remember the controversy over the giant pterodactyl photo from Tombstone?
Yes, yeah.
This is in the same region. So you got another weird creature seen in that region. The witness, J.H. Merritt, said it was built like a bear, has a foot like one, but has a tail as long as a lion's, and I've never seen such tusks as he had. Now, what's interesting is that its victim is mostly dogs. It's attacking dogs. It's killing dogs. And there is a particular dog killer creature that pops up again. It gets this label, the dog killer.
Well, like a chupacabra kind of thing?
It's funny you say that. It was repeatedly seen in Kentucky in the late 1800s. And John points out in the book, this was a flap. And when he says flap, he means that all of a sudden there was a ton of sightings of this thing and then nothing. It's gone. It's never been seen again. It just appeared for this brief moment in history, caused massive chaos, like Mothman, for example, and then it's gone. He says for several years, denizens in the vicinity of Danville, Kentucky, were terrorized by a creature that they dubbed the Dog Eater. The reign of terror began in 1885 and continued sporadically into the 1890s. He says a consistent behavior the beast exhibited was tearing off the heads of animals, but leaving the bodies behind. It was a really odd one-off trait, and there were also cases of blood being drained as well. In terms of descriptions, most of the eyewitnesses said it was a quadrupedal mammal. But the size from the reports would vary. The descriptions would vary. Some people said it almost looked like a cat. Others said it looked like a huge dog. And some people said a bear. So the first article reporting this was April the 7th, 1885, from the Hopkinsville semi-weekly South Kentuckian paper, front page story. It said, "The dog eater. The sensation of the day is the so-called dog eater. An animal of some sort has been roaming about the country and has killed a number of dogs. This has been sufficiently established. Some say it looks like a lion. Others think it looks more like a Bengal tiger. And others say it's like an alligator." So again, the only thing they could be sure on was that A, it was killing dogs, and B, it was on all fours. Only 3 days later, the Stanford Semi-Weekly Interior Journal runs another story about how a local man, Henry Owens, had been stalked by the beast as he walked to town. The same paper reported on June the 17th that a strange animal had been seen on the farm of Roy Arnold. Apparently, the man's son saw the beast. He described it as yellow in color, over 3 feet long, and having a bushy tail. The next mention of the beast comes from this article from the Columbus Inquirer. This was November the 23rd, 1888. It said, "The greatest sensation of Jasper County is now created by what is called a dog eater. It goes at night to different houses, and wherever it finds a small dog, it kills it and eats its head. No one knows what the thing is, and there is considerable excitement over it." It's just eating their head? You know what this reminded me of? We were talking about the weird flap of strangeness in Yorkshire, and there was those cat mutilations.
Oh, yes. Yep.
These pets are just...
And a lot of them lost their heads.
They're losing their heads. They're just finding torsos of cats, and no one could figure it out. And when the investigator went into it in more detail, he found this wasn't an isolated case in a particular region in that area of the UK. It was stretched out.
It was across Europe.
A wide area. He found, parallel cases in different parts of the European Union, I guess you could say. And it seems to be like some odd crossovers with that kind of activity here, because the sightings and the killing continued. The Cincinnati Commercial Gazette published the following on July the 20th, 1891, on the second page. It had the title, "A Dog Destroyer." The peaceful residents in the vicinity of the village of Dunville in Casey County are just now very much exercised and nonplussed by the appearance of a strange and destructive animal. For the want of a better appellation, they call it the dog eater. Some 3 years ago, the people of the west end of this country or county were the victims of the depredations of a similar animal, and it seemingly has an appetite for no other game than the canine tribe, it said. So it's only killing dogs. That's all it's going for. Now, it says, the article goes on to say the creature disappeared, but now it's returned and is creating a furor in Casey County. So the first indication that it was back was last Tuesday night, the paper said. There was a Mr. G.R. Williams, and Williams owns a large pack of foxhounds. Now, he went out to where the dogs had been chained the night before, and every single one of them was killed. But there was no evidence of struggle. And it says in the article that he couldn't figure out how they met their death.
Were they missing their heads?
No, but there was no other footprints. There was no blood splattered anywhere. He just couldn't figure out how they had passed away. But it says, get this, it says, after a second and more careful examination, he found that each dog had a small wound in its throat. And he saw that whatever did the work overpowered the beasts with very little difficulty, and then perforating their throats, sucked their blood.
Mm.
So immediately, it's funny you mentioned chupacabra as soon as I spoke about this. You're like, chupacabra!
Well, it just lines up with what I'm going to be talking about a little bit in the plus extension when you look at folklore. And, you know, one of the things I'm going to discuss is basically how, folklorists are unwilling to incorporate paranormal and anomalous phenomena into it, because folklore is like, well, no, it's more of a cultural belief. It's a reflection of the culture at the time. But when you actually step away from it, you can see similarities in these, folkloric entities that pop up that appear in different cultures that have no connection to each other. And one thing that is recurring in all of these cultures is the bloodsuckers. The bloodsuckers appear in many different cultures, and it seems to be this common kind of thing, even up to modern times. So the fact that these entities are showing up, it has a paranormal element to it. Well, it's already strange already, but it's more than that.
They can't find the thing either. So it's hunting parties are set out, hunting dogs, but there's nothing. There's no trail to follow. It's like the thing was never there in the first place.
Also, scientifically, nothing sucks blood like that.
Right.
Like drains an actual animal and like a dog. I mean, yeah, there's vampiric bats and other creatures, but nothing like that.
But the newspaper said that the farmers had a plan and they were heavily armed. They hid themselves a few nights later and they had one of their other dogs as a decoy, as bait for this thing.
Or dog.
And they claim that as they were just about to give up, basically the moon was quite bright that night. And over the crouching form of the decoy dog, they saw an immense white animal, unlike anything they'd ever seen before. They say it was built upon the greyhound pattern, so maybe, shaped like a greyhound, but larger in every way, being 4 feet high, about 6 feet from the end of its tail to the tip of its nose or snout. So interested and frightened were they that not a gun was fired, and after the strange beast had finished its meal, it calmly galloped away. The men went to the dead dog and found that it had been wounded in the same way as the hounds killed 2 nights before, with that injury in its throat and exsanguinated. So what would cause them not to fire? I mean, that immediately sounds paranormal in itself. What are they doing?
This paranormal control that seems to step in when people are encountering these entities or these creatures, they lose free will.
Well, the newspaper went and interviewed them, and according to the report, one of the gentlemen who was there, who saw this thing, said when the decoy dog saw it, it was overcome with terror, but seemed unable to defend itself, like almost like it had gone into some kind of weird trance, and just was like it was like a spider coming down a web and sucking the juices out of a fly. It couldn't do anything. It was just paralyzed there. It says the tracks left by this animal look like those made by a bird. Again, go back 2 weeks ago. Joshua Cutchin, Timothy Renner, talking about the three-toed footprints that show up in these strange Sasquatch encounters, the high strangeness associated with Sasquatch. We have this strange animal sucking the blood of its victims. It's completely white. It can't be injured. And it leaves these 3-toed prints like a bird. So very, very bizarre. And of course, the first thing you're thinking is chupacabra. But he points out, LeMay says quite clearly that back then, chupacabra wasn't a part of American folklore, wasn't a thing. And the fact that the tracks are bird tracks is just completely bizarre. But of course, we have the context of the high strangeness with Sasquatch.
But this is the thing. This is what's really important to point out, is that folklore actually isn't a reflection of, the cultural creations of the time. It is in some sense. But when we're talking about some of these paranormal creatures, the folklore that's written down could actually be interpreted as being a representation of the being that people are genuinely encountering. So we've got a chupacabra-style creature, but they didn't know how to describe it, but it fits into the same category.
Yeah, that's why it has so many different descriptions, because it defies definition.
Yes.
So in 1892, the Brownsville Daily Herald of Texas then reported that it was showing up and killing dogs there. There was another report on December the 28th. There was an article in the Evening Times in Wisconsin on October the 28th talking about James O'Connor and his fellow driver, R.E. Coleman. Now, they were driving horses. They had one of those carriages with a bunch of people in them. It's called a bus. It's like a bus driven by horses. And suddenly the horses just freak out, just rear up, the bus stops, and the 2 drivers see this thing come across the road. And they described it of enormous size and ferocious looks. It glared at them and then just basically leisurely left the scene. Like, didn't attack them, just gave them a glare, just a knowing look, and disappeared. So the animal was obviously clearly seen by the 2 drivers. They described it as being a dark color with a broad, flat-like body, a large head, large fiery eyes, a woolly hide, powerful limbs, and a big bushy tail, a monstrous head and mouth. So after a career of about 3 months in that vicinity, the monster then next headed to Casey County, started killing dogs there. 12 fine hounds were killed. And there's an interesting report from Mr. Woodford G. Portwood, who says he plainly saw the dog eater one night while he was with a fishing party on Dix River. He says he was some distance from camp, unaccompanied. He had his loyal pointer dog, Jeff, with him. I like the name Jeff. And he was basically attending to his fishing poles. and there was a bit of a commotion in the bushes, and he realized Jeff was missing. He hears Jeff howling in the bushes, and Jeff comes shooting out, running back to his owner. Now, following him is this ferocious-looking beast, according to the report, and as soon as it sees Mr. Woodford Portwood standing there, it immediately stops. And get this, he said its eyes looked like two burning balls of fire. And it had this kind of look of acknowledgement when it saw him, like it didn't attack. It knew that's a human. The human's seen me. And it basically turned around and just ambled back into the bushes.
Yeah, again, so you get this theme of where the entities display, even though they're strange and they appear to be animalistic, they have an intelligence which is on par with a human being, and they know when they're caught out.
And the two eyes that are like burning balls of fire.
Like the black dogs we've been talking about recently.
What does that sound like? This has got paranormal written all over it. And his dog has never been, poor Jeff. I mean, Jeff could never go fishing again.
No, the dog would be traumatized by it.
Two other gentlemen, Mr. Phil Marks and Edward Fox. And Edward Fox was an artist. They claimed to have seen this beast one night as they were returning from a coon hunt. And suddenly Mark's horse reared up, and they realized why, because the dog eater stepped on the road in front of them and just started drinking out of this small stream.
See, that's the weird thing that when I hear stories like that about these creatures clearly they're cryptozoological, which means they may be flesh and blood, but they display these elements of high strangeness, these ephemeral attributes. So why do they have to drink? Why do they have to feed?
Well, they had a pack of hounds with them, and the hounds were all paralyzed with fright. They were just huddling together, whining. This is the reaction we see from conventional animals that are confronting this maybe non-conventional metaphysical creature.
But it's even stranger when it's hunting hounds because they're not usually fearful at all.
Mr. Fox drew his revolver, shot the dog eater, which simply disappeared, jumped a fence and disappeared. Again, the shot didn't do anything. But because Mr. Fox was an artist, he decided to do a rough sketch of what he saw. This is it. Put it in the show notes, Aaron.
What on earth? It's like a weird... It's a caricature.
It's like a hyena with webbed feet and a man's face.
Well, but you know what's strange, though? That's like some of the early settler descriptions of bunyips.
It looks like a yokai as well.
Yeah, it does have a yokai kind of feel to it. Like strange.
Japanese. Maybe it's the Gozu curse. So one thing John LeMay says it might be is a boar hyena. And if you look those up today, they were kind of a type of marsupial that have webbed feet.
But how big are they?
It's similar to the report. So, 4 to 5 feet in length, I think, maybe a little bit smaller. It was a carnivorous animal, one of the primary predators of the day. The head was bear-like, the tail was long and bushy, and it had these webbed, clawed footprints. So it kind of, maybe it would have looked like the three-toed prints they were reporting.
That's interesting. I just looked them up, and yeah, again, artist depiction. But it does actually look kind of like the image that you showed me, or the drawing that you showed me. They obviously got it a little bit wrong, but it's similar.
Then it was never seen again. Disappeared.
Yeah,
no more reports, gone. That's it.
These sorts of sightings that happen globally, I mean, we hear about the megafauna sightings that you have in Australia. I mean, these things have been dead for tens of thousands of years, if not longer. And yet people have got reports of encountering these things in isolated locations. I hypothesize that this is something to do with time slips, that these animals are getting sucked in through, or the people are wandering through. Normally it's them coming into our time because there's still landmarks that are current for this time. But I think that might be a really nice, neat explanation for what these things are, because there surely can't be a surviving population of them.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I mean, I liked picking out these ones, especially the ones that are like hyenas or extinct marsupials, because if you remember a few weeks ago, I think it was on a Plus episode, but I was covering reports from Australians that are four-wheel drive enthusiasts. Mm-hmm. And they had reported
the weird stuff they've seen.
They'd reported a lot of panther sightings, but also a bunch of people said they'd seen hyenas deep in the Australian outback. What are hyenas doing out there? But a lot of these reports are similar. So maybe they weren't seeing hyenas. Maybe they were seeing something else that has that kind of look about it.
The only thing about those reports with hyenas, I think I mentioned this, is that I believe it's plausible just because of how dense Australian bush is and how wide that country is, that maybe a population could exist, especially hyenas, because they're scavengers and they're able to survive and there's plenty of food out there. So I wouldn't be surprised if there are populations of escaped hyenas from circuses or something.
And remember, they saw strange beasts that had the head of a bear, but the body of a sausage dog.
Yes, how could I forget?
And they were crossing the road.
I do
the head
remember
of
that.
A kangaroo and the body of a sausage
That's
dog.
right. Yes, I do recall that.
But coming up after the break, we have what is perhaps the animal with I guess the most amount of evidence for it being some surviving population, and that's the mammoth. That's coming up on Mysterious Universe. Stay with us. We're back on Mysterious Universe. We're talking about John LeMay's brand new book, Cowboys and Saurians, Ice Age edition. And he says of all the Ice Age creatures, obviously the mammoth is the best known. It lived during the Pleistocene epoch. And there are theories that it survived up until around 4,000 years ago. I think that's accepted.
Yeah, that's accepted. Yeah.
But from time to time, frozen specimens have been found in Alaska and Siberia, and there's still a big market for finding remains, especially the tusks in Siberia. The first was found as far back as 1692, but the best-known baby mammoth, nicknamed Dima, was discovered in Siberia in 1977. But in Alaska in the late 1880s, there was an old fur trapper who used to trade with the natives. And they brought in this pair of enormous ivory tusks that they said had come from a mammoth. And, you know, when they say came from a mammoth, it means that they found remains, that they found really old fossilized remains that were frozen, and they dug them up and they sell them on. So that wasn't strange in itself. But when he was examining the tusks, he noticed traces of fresh blood and flesh on the end of them.
What, that when it was thawing or something?
Well, he didn't know. He's like, what? Why is there fresh blood on these tusks? Are any of your men injured? So this story was reported in the Wichita Eagle out of Kansas on July the 26th, 1889. And the reporter is essentially interviewing this guy named Mr. Kohler Fowler. And he's not working for the company anymore, but he did this 12-year run for the Alaska Fur and Commercial Company, and essentially had to live in Alaska for 12 years working for this company. And the reporter says, look, out of all your time out there in that wilderness, what's the most wonderful thing you ever saw or heard while you're out there? And the guy kind of hesitated for a second and then smiled and says, okay, well, 2 years ago, last summer, I left Kodiak for a trip to the headwaters of the Snake River, where our traveling agents had established a trading station at the Indian village. And he said the chief of this family of Inuits was named Toli Tima. And essentially this guy was recommended to go and trade with this guy. So he was received with hospitality, and, you know, they shared drinks, and they started to negotiate on this big lot of fossil ivory and how much he was going to pay for it. And it was a lot. There were several thousand pounds of this tusk. And so Mr. Fowler starts, you know, checking out the merchandise. He wants to see what quality it's in, you know, how old it is and how damaged it is.
Yeah, of course you would.
And that's when he finds the largest tusks there have fresh blood and traces of partly decomposed flesh still on them. And he's like, what is this? Why is there blood on these tusks? What is going on? So the chieftain basically said, oh, that's from my two young hunters. They took this from a live animal. They killed it and took the tusks. And Fowler's like, hang on a second.
Did they not know that they were extinct?
No, because apparently they see them occasionally. This was the reporting from this early era. The native people were just very much blasé about mammoths and, you know, mastodons still being alive and out there. And
Because they're seeing them.
Yeah, because they're seeing
Allegedly.
them. And if you're lucky enough to be armed and come across one, you take it down because you want to sell their tusks. That's what they did. And so he tells this story and tells the hunters to come and tell their story to him. And essentially they describe it as being 20 feet in height, 30 feet in length, basically shaped by like an elephant, but its ears are smaller, the eyes are bigger, trunk is longer, more slender. They said, look, the tusks were yellowish white in color. 4 of them are kind of coming out like a boar. And they described the tusks, 4 feet long, coming to a sharp point, and they ended up taking it down. So they claimed that they shot it with, they had muskets, and one of the shots must have been lucky. They took it out, must have hit it in the brain or something, and the animal came down and they took the tusks.
Were any samples kept? Because obviously modern DNA analysis would be able to tell us if it's real.
Well, maybe they ate it. I don't know. Maybe they made skins out of it. But they knew that this guy wanted to buy the ivory, so that's all they brought to him.
Yeah.
But again, it's like, it's rare for them, but wasn't really a big deal. So this guy was bamboozled. He ended up buying it. But there were more reports that came out of these herds that were still found on the high plateaus in interior Alaska around this region at the headwaters of the Snake River. And a bunch of these details match up, like the way they described its body, the way that they described its ears being a little bit smaller. It's all consistent with the fossil record of mammoths. Later, hunters described, and they did sketches, and they drew this coarse hair. They actually colored it red. So the sketches by the Indians matched up with what we think they looked like, and the remains we've found as well. So there is a little bit of evidence that's been floating around out there that mammoths didn't go extinct 4,000 years ago. It's much more recent. They're probably absolutely extinct now, but maybe it was only in the last couple of 100 years that they went extinct.
You know what? I wouldn't be surprised if there were very small remaining populations. You're right. It's probably highly likely that they're extinct now. But yeah, a couple of 100 years, I think it might be just slightly plausible.
And if you pick up John LeMay's book, which I highly recommend you do, there's a ton of great stories. I've only just picked out a couple. I mean, obviously, I couldn't miss the giant beavers. Like that.
Well, that was a real headliner, Ben. I mean, I think that's some of the best work that you've done, and that's
talk about starting the show with a bang. A man saw a beaver, and it was large. The end. But there's a ton of stories of people coming across these large tracks that kind of sink into the moss, and they clearly look like elephant tracks, but they're huge. These go through all the late 1800s and even into the early 1900s. There's tons of these stories. But while we were talking about Inuits, I thought the ultimate is it real story comes from this report that appeared in the Ogden Daily Standard in April 15th, 1916. And it's about a party of Eskimos who came trekking into the town of Fairbanks, Alaska. They had this crazy story to tell. They were being led by this grizzled old man who looked like he'd been through hell. And as he comes into the town, he's carrying this frozen piece of flesh, and he's holding it like it's his baby.
How big was it?
It's like a foot square. It's just the frozen meat. And he's got his band, behind him of all his men. They've all got these skins to trade. And one of the white men that was there, who was going through all their merchandise and wondering whether he should buy something, he says to the old man, he's like, what is that piece of meat you're carrying around? Why are you carrying this piece of flesh? And excuse the way this is written, because this is straight from this newspaper story. But the old man kind of drew back and held the skin closer to his chest and said, "Him great luck giver, we no sell him." And the white guy's like, "What do you mean you're not going to sell it? What is it?" And the chief of this band of Eskimos says, "No flesh, no bird that flies, no anything. Him come from Big Demon. Big Demon kill 2 of our tribe. Him bring great luck."
I don't know if killing 2 of your tribe brings great luck.
Well, it was maybe it's the honor, like this thing was such a powerful beast. It had such power that if you kill it.
So obviously they brought it down.
That's what the piece of flesh was.
Yeah.
It was from this great demon that killed 2 of their men. So with difficulty and much patience, because his English obviously wasn't very good, this white trader got from the Eskimos the story of this frozen piece of flesh and the story of the big demon. So the Eskimos said that more than a year ago, he and about 50 of his men, they were living on Thetis Island off the northern extremity of Alaska. It's like way out there in the middle of nowhere.
Freezing.
And one day his son and 11 other men of the tribe went on a fishing expedition, and it carried them over the ice of the Arctic Ocean. Now, apparently there was a sudden breakup of the ice, and, this is something that's your worst nightmare when you're out there. And essentially all 12 of them were carried out to sea. They're stuck on this floating iceberg. They had a few fish with them so they could survive, and they had their tools. They were able to make fire, but that's it. And all they could do was pray that the current would lead them to land and they'd be able to get back home. Now, they ended up devouring the fish and just huddled together for warmth. And for many days, apparently, they drifted. They just kept drifting through the Arctic Ocean. And it's really one of these survival stories because the days started to stretch into weeks and they'd almost given up. But through the northern mist, according to this chieftain's story, they saw land. And the iceberg started to drift towards this land. Now, not only did they see land, but they saw mountain ranges, this strange new country they'd never seen before. And when they made their way ashore, they found signs of game. There was musk ox, there was Arctic fox, there was reindeer. And of course, they had their weapons with them. So they managed to get food and they managed to hunt and they managed to stay alive. They got enough protein to keep going. And they decided to start wandering inland, thinking maybe we'll find a settlement, maybe people will be able to help us get back home. So for many days, they tracked through this country. And finally, they reached the top of this really high ridge and they started to, climb to get a better sense of where they were. Maybe they could figure out where to go. And to their great joy, according to the story, they saw far off in the distance this land that seemed different. Like it looked fertile. It looked like there was more game. There was more, trees and plant life. Because remember,
Tropical?
No, not tropical, but they're just in the middle of all this snow. They've got to find something better. And to their amazement, as they're walking towards this area, the snow starts to become softer. And eventually it finally disappears. There's no snow anymore. And this high flat land, the only way to get it is through this narrow pass. And they walk through this stream of water and they think, hang on a second, the river's warm. Why is the water warm? The temperature of the water made them superstitious. Like they're a superstitious, culture anyway. But they were desperate to continue ahead. They were a bit wary, but they thought, we've got to find food. We've got to keep going. We've got to find civilization. When they reached the plateau, they found it to be this kind of marshy land, almost like a swamp. And in the middle of it was this large lake, and there's just clouds of steam coming off it. Now, there was game everywhere. And the Eskimos, when they stayed, they got enough food. They managed to rebuild their strength. They finally got a good night's sleep, since they'd been carried away from Thetis Island. And after many hours of this kind of really relaxing sleep, their leader was aroused by these strange whining noises, like a call from an animal they'd never heard before. And so he kind of gets up. Everyone else is asleep. He gets up and he scrambles over this rocky formation where everyone's sleeping. And he looks over and he sees...
Not a brontosaurus. No, come on.
He sees a dinosaur. 50 feet in length is a monster with a huge head, a long neck, and a long tail. Its hind legs are large and powerful, and its forward ones are short. The panic-stricken Eskimo, he's obviously freaked out. He kind of climbs back and wakes up his buddy. He's like, dude, you got to come and look at this. So his friend gets up, creeps over, and his friend looks over and sees this freaking dinosaur and says, the gods have cursed us. This is a horrible place. We're in hell. The gods have cursed us. And
I don't know if seeing a dinosaur means you're in hell, but
their reasoning is this place is cursed. We've got all this land, right? We've got all this warm land and there's all this game and we get all this food, but there's demons here. And their conclusion, this is what they decide. One of the guys says, look, brother, what we're seeing isn't there. This is a demon trying to test us. Let's just go back to sleep.
no, it's a sauropod.
So the other guy, he obviously doesn't buy this, so he wakes up the other members of the party. All 12 of them slowly wake up. They creep over to the rock, and they agree that 200 yards away from them, flopped in the marshy land, is a tremendous beast making this weird whining sound. But again, because of their tribal customs, they kind of get together and they have a vote. And their decision is that the god of fortune has blessed them with comfort, but cursed them with a false vision. This is a test. Obviously, what they're seeing isn't real. So to essentially acknowledge the god's wisdom, they basically draw straws, and two of them with the shorter straws have to go and speak to the demon, because if they do that and challenge it, it will leave.
Okay, this is not going to end well.
So these two Eskimos are, all right, let's go. And they walk down the ridge. Let's go talk to this, what is essentially a Tyrannosaurus Rex. So they go up to it, and as soon as they get closer, it's like, actually, you need to leave because you're not real. And the reaction is essentially this.
Right. Yeah.
And it just eats them.
Yeah. These are the two that have been killed, I take it.
It just eats the two guys. It smashes them with its tail, and proceeds to eat them in front of the rest of their tribesmen. Now, they now think this is still some kind of illusion. Like the rest of the tribe are like, whoa.
No, it's fine.
Let's not jump to conclusion, guys. Obviously, this is some kind of trick from the god, and our compatriots aren't actually eaten by that horrible beast. When we leave this cursed place, we'll suddenly find that they're with us again and nothing's happened to them. And the rest of them are like, all right, good plan. Let's just
go and see the beast again.
Go with that. Now, obviously the question is this real? It keeps coming up. To them, nothing's real. They believe that they're under some kind of spell. So essentially they creep away from the plateau, and they realize that they've got to leave this cursed land, and then their compatriots will return. Food becomes scarce, and they have to actually return because they can't find anything to eat. So they have to go back to this cursed land. Essentially what they do is they return and they come across the body of a dead demon. And this is one of these dinosaurs that has essentially passed away. It's died. It's been killed by something. And this is where they take the skin. They take the flesh off this.
So they didn't even fight this creature that killed their tribesmen. They found a dead one.
Yeah, and when they cut the flesh out, they see in the distance another one of these demons eating an ox. And this is where they're like, okay, we've seen enough. Yeah, maybe this is real. It's time to go. Let's take the flesh. Let's get the hell out of here. They have a cache of food from their previous hunting. They end up finally reaching the ocean, and they throw themselves onto another flotsam of ice and just pray that the god of fate will blow them back to their homeland, and that the piece of flesh and hide that they've taken will prove their story, that the demon was real. And essentially, they make it back home. They make it back and have this story to tell. So the obvious question, of course, is
it real, fuckers? Is it real?
Good question.
Now,
and is it?
John LeMay says, obviously this is a fictional story, okay? He doesn't believe a word of it. And various versions of this story were posted in newspapers around the time. And it's a little bit suspicious, obviously, that it came out on April the 17th. Like maybe they copied it from an April the 1st story from another newspaper.
Yeah.
However, he asked the question, well, why would I put such an obvious fiction in this book? And he says it's because it ties in with all these stories of a warm oasis-like land found in the wilds of Alaska.
Yeah, I've heard stories like that before as well.
And
they are actually quite common.
A bunch of examples where trappers, for example, they're not saying that they saw dinosaurs, but it does start to overlap with some of the high strangeness that we've mentioned with these creatures on this show and on previous shows before. So in the 1900s, there were trappers in the wilderness that told tales of hidden, almost tropical valleys.
Yeah.
They theorized these lands were heated by subterranean volcanic activity that produced lush vegetation, and occasionally they had monsters. So the first report was from the Corvallis Times on September the 6th, 1903. This Portland Journal said that a Dr. John P. Frizzelli organized an expedition in Portland to bring back to this city the body of a mastodon, which he firmly believes exists upon Unimak Island off the western coast of Alaska.
What's a mastodon? That's a woolly mammoth, yeah.
It's a mammoth. So he was accompanied by James Nugent, and he lists all his sailors and men that were with him. And he claims that when he was stationed as a surgeon for the government on that island, he said, this region is so fascinating that I had to return. He says, I've been to New Zealand, I've been to Van Diemen's Land, I've been to Mexico, I've been to Florida and Canada, yet there's nowhere in the world where I've seen the marvels that are found in the far north within the limits of the United States territories. And he starts talking about these tracks that he saw while he was there. And again, he said they were like elephant tracks, but larger. He said, we followed them for 2 miles and established the fact that the monster inhabited a cave in the side of a volcano. The volcano is active, emitting every 5 minutes smoke and ashes, which would shower down the mountainside. And he starts describing all the lupin and violets and incredible blossoms that would come really early in the year, and the ground is warm from underground fires. And there's more stories like this. There's one from the Valdez Miner in 1922, the story of a sea otter trapping duo, Hank Russell and Jack Lee, who are climbing a high Arctic pass. And according to them, they see this lush green valley below. And it looks as if it's in the dormant crater of a volcano. It's this huge volcano, but this beautiful lush valley down there. And when they descend in there, it's like going into a lost world. It's so hot, they have to take off all their gear. When they make camp that night, they can't even use their sleeping bags because the ground is so nice and warm. And they see all these animals across this lush landscape. There's a large lake, like from the Eskimo story. There's steaming fishes. No dinosaurs or monsters, but they do see something interesting. They said they were looking over the valley and they saw animal species that they hadn't seen before. They said they saw tracks that were too large for bears. Some were 18 inches in diameter, perfectly round, with 3 depressions in the front, which is basically an elephant track.
Yeah.
Or, sorry, a mammoth
yeah.
track. He said had they been living in the prehistoric age, obviously they would be mammoth tracks. They also saw bear tracks of enormous size. And later on, there's more reports from followers, not the same people, but a Captain Sam S. Scott, who said he came across a similar land in the Cassia Mountains of British Columbia. He too mentioned strange animals. Remember the dog eater thing was this white greyhound looking creature. This guy said he saw strange white deer he'd never seen before. The 3-toed footprints show up again. So all this kind of bizarreness exists in these stories, these legends of these hidden valleys covered in fog, nestled in, dormant volcanoes that provide an oasis for these undiscovered creatures.
You know, you got my attention there because I can't recall if it was Brent Swanson or Nick Redfern, but they wrote an article quite a while back though about the white things and the cryptozoological white entities that show up. And normally they've got this white shaggy hair, or they'll have this, and when I mean white, I'm talking bleach white color, like it's a sparkling kind of white color, and it pops up. It's almost like albino cryptozoology is the only, and it's kind of interesting because it makes you think, well, albinoism actually exists in nature normally. So maybe these things are real in some sense, but there's obviously a high strangeness aspect to them.
Yeah, I don't know. I always question, did they go into another dimension?
That's what I'm wondering. Yeah.
Did they enter some realm that's normally inaccessible? Is that why they're seeing strange creatures that have never been discovered because they're not to be discovered in our dimension?
Well, that's a possibility. Yeah, maybe it's interdimensional, or if it's some type of time slip element. You think about it. I mean, if I was to come across a creature that was from a different time, I would have no context to what it is. I would have no idea. And I would be like, oh,
unless it was a dinosaur.
Oh, well, unless it was a dinosaur. But even I think we don't exactly know what dinosaurs look like. We can speculate because of skeletal structure, but we don't even know what color they were. I mean, we think that dinosaurs were greens and grays and browns, but dinosaurs might have actually been very brightly colored, like we see with modern birds. We simply don't know. We're guesstimating what's going on. So maybe if I saw a dinosaur, I wouldn't be able to identify it.
Well, if you're interested in more stories of strange saurians being seen. Definitely check this out. Cowboys and Saurians, Ice Age from John LeMay. I left out the first story, which I actually think is the best, one of the best in the book. And it's a tale of explorers, hunters in the norths of Canada, essentially where all these mammoth sightings are. But they're adamant that they saw a dinosaur. And I can't remember the name of the species, but it was a particular species that was seen.
Like a carnivore kind of thing, or
kind of like a T-Rex, but not as big.
right?
And it's fascinating, the description and how he tells the story, because multiple people saw it, and then years later, other hunting expeditions went out there and claimed they saw it as well.
That's the thing about these stories, and you're absolutely right. I mean, yeah, some of these stories could be fiction, they could be sensationalized, and in fact, they're probably likely to be that. But when you hear multiple sources of people that are disconnected, once again, that are reporting similar incidents, it makes you think that, well, hang on a second, maybe people are seeing something that's real.
But they describe seeing something that had hair and feathers on it. And he points out that at the time, that wasn't something that was even considered in...
It wasn't known.
In that research. It was just considered that... It was actually considered that dinosaurs were cold-blooded. You know, they're just skin and leathery skin, like a
in
reptile.
paleontology. Yeah.
And that was the time. So for them to suggest that they saw something with hair and with feathers... You know, it's quite intriguing. And then there were later sightings in Siberia. So there was a suggestion that if the Bering Land Bridge, if there was enough ice that had frozen over, it would be able to come over from Siberia.
Oh.
And that it wasn't really native to that area. It is just a particularly cold period of 10 years or so, and it was coming over from a frozen land bridge.
So it allowed it to migrate.
Hunting in a new region. And there's also apparently bones of this particular species that have been found, which seem too new. Like they're thousands of years old instead of millions of years old, for example.
But how recent are most of these reports we're talking about? We're still talking about, 60 to 100 years ago?
1800s.
Yeah. So this is the thing. So what's really disappointing, and I just don't know if it's they actually all have died out or if the phenomenon has died down, but you really don't hear any of these modern reports. And, with our modern DNA technology and molecular biology techniques, imagine what we would be able to find if we were what we would be able to verify if we could just get a sample. And it doesn't seem like it's there anymore, but it fits in with what we've spoken about with the paranormal, that the paranormal is elusive.
That's because the elites captured them all and set up their own private zoo.
Yeah, I'm not going to go with that one. Don't think that happened. I never know. I mean, maybe
they own all the islands, Aaron.
Yeah.
Think about it.
You think there's some weird Jurassic Park island somewhere?
It's not a park. It's a private zoo. It's not a park for the public. It's for the elites only.
Correct.
You drink your adrenochrome and then go and look at your dinosaurs. You get on the Lolita Express and then go look at your dinosaurs. So before we go into our Plus extension, I just wanted to mention something else that I came across, which I think will lead nicely into what you've got coming up in Plus.
Mm-hmm.
I saw this book from Angelia Shear called UFO Encounters, How High Strange Events Transform Human Perception. I've been keeping an eye on this for a while and thought I'll just pick it up today and see what she's about. She's a fantastic researcher.
Oh, really?
She won the 2019 Field Researcher Award for MUFON. And you can really tell why, because she's been on the ground, boots on the ground, speaking to eyewitnesses for over 35 years.
Yeah, great.
She's spoken to over 2,000 witnesses. And she's based in Tennessee, I believe, and was the director of MUFON there for a while. But it starts life like a lot of these reports from UFO researchers where they state that they went into it with a nuts and bolts approach. She said that was always her thing. She wanted serious scientific inquiry. But when she first started out, she wanted to ignore all the strange stuff. She's like, don't tell me about this kind of abduction stuff. I don't want to hear about, poltergeist or any weird stuff like that. Just tell me the nuts and bolts of what you saw. But she said no matter how hard she tried to keep that out of her research, those pure anomalous experiences where it's just this bizarre high strangeness, they just kept on coming up. It was persistent,
unavoidable,
time and time again. And no matter what kind of scientific inquiry she threw at them, it just wouldn't go away. And so I thought, well, that's great. I mean, obviously she has a better understanding of, what's really going on. And I started to go through her cases, and she's got some really weird ones in here. I mean, tons of UFO reports, a bunch of alien abduction stories from eyewitnesses that, haven't really been published anywhere else outside of her work, but just some really weird ones. So this was from January of 2016, it's a fairly recent case. And it occurred in South Tennessee. This is the witness. His name's Michael, and she changes the names and locations, obviously, to protect their privacy. But essentially, Michael said he was working the graveyard shift on this important project when this incident occurred. Essentially, it doesn't say where he was working, but it's a large office area, and it's really late at night, and just a few of the staff have stayed back. And as he's working through the night, nature called, so he needed to go to the bathroom. And he said he just got up, left his workstation, and went to the restroom. Now, he said getting to the toilets from his office desk, it's a bit of a hike. You got to go down the hall and pass through some double doors, and then there's a long hallway, and then finally you make it to the men's room. So he goes in, he does his business, and he starts washing his hands, and then he's about to head back to his office, but suddenly he just feels like he's not alone anymore. No one's come into the bathroom because it's got one of those big,
You'll hear it.
Doors that everyone can hear, but he just suddenly feels like he's not alone in there and that someone's watching him. Now, he's quite startled because something catches his eye, and he turns around and notices someone wearing this strange cap that's flat on top. There's someone else in the bathroom, not in the stall, but just in the bathroom with him. And he says this man seemed to tip his head up to view the witness, Michael, under the hat. If you pull the brim down really low and then you just kind of look up?
Yeah.
That's what he does to check out Michael. And he said it's almost like this guy was trying to keep an eye on me. Now, he immediately moves over to the wall because he's like, what is going on? He wants to put some distance between him and this stranger who's just appeared in the men's bathroom. Now, when he says this man appeared, he says the man had bright, pale skin with these strange grey tones. Now, he was wearing pants and a jacket, but it seemed to be made of some kind of shiny silver material. Now, his shoes looked kind of normal, he said, and he was wearing shades over his eyes, like dark glasses. But he said, I could make out under his eyes or under the shades that his eyes weren't blinking. He was just staring at me. Now, this individual, he said, quickly turned around to face the wall when he realized that I had noticed him. And he appeared to be extremely nervous and shaking. Now, he's only a few feet away from this strange guy. And immediately he starts to realize, okay, something's not right about this. There's something way off right now. But it was too weird to kind of compute. And this weird guy is just facing away from him, shaking. Now, he says, he actually speaks up and he says, look, sorry, I didn't mean to startle you. I'm about to leave and you can have the room to yourself. And he turns around and finishes washing his hands, and he knows this is super strange and something is wrong, but it hadn't really sunk in yet. And while he's finishing washing his hands, he's aware that this strange man keeps turning around to look at him. And he starts to feel sorry for him. And he starts to think, I wonder why I've never seen this guy before. And he just mentally thought that maybe he was a new employee and he was just nervous about his first night on the job, and that's why he was acting so strangely. And then it dawned on him that he hadn't heard the doors open to the bathroom, and he was sure there was no one in there when he first entered. And at this moment, another employee starts to open the bathroom door. And now this strange man looks really nervous. Like he's really starting to freak out, shaking even more, trying to hide himself away. And he quickly swings around, this strange man with the cap on, and starts to walk towards the back wall at the end of the stalls on the other side of this bathroom. And the eyewitness said this strange light started to appear on that side of the wall. And it just gets brighter and brighter and brighter. And he watches as this man with the cap on ducks his head and leaps into that light in the wall and disappears. Now, the eyewitness, Michael, he's just standing there going, what the hell did I just see? At this point, the other employee is now fully walks into the bathroom, Hey, Mike, how's it going? Yeah, busy night, late work tonight, eh? Just starts peeing next to him. And Mike's just standing there like, oh, what the hell just happened? Now, the presence of the other employee broke him out of this weird, altered state that he was in, this shock of seeing this incredibly strange thing. And in retrospect, he said, I'm not sure that the man I saw was a real solid being. He said, I could hear him brush against the wall, and his shoes made this scuffing noise as he moved, but he was just extremely nervous. And he said, I realized later he didn't become so nervous until he realized I could actually see him. And he says, look, I've thought hard and long about this moment. And, there was no badges or anything identifying on his clothing. He just was wearing this hat. His face was human-like but different. I couldn't see any hair coming out from under his cap, and he had this long, thin nose. And he said, I had this strange impression that maybe his ears were larger under that cap, but I couldn't know for sure. And he said, look, I was just hesitant to report this to anyone. I haven't told anyone around the office. I mean, I want to keep my job. I don't want people to think I'm crazy. I've had no other strange experiences other than this, and I don't want to. But when she essentially asked him, when Angelia asked him how his life has been affected, he said, you wouldn't believe it. I can't sleep. I have disturbing dreams all the time. I think about this moment over and over and over again. I wasn't afraid of this man in the moment, but it's just the strange, surreal details. And he says, I wanted to make this report so someone else could know what happened, but I don't want to discuss this at all ever again. It's just too disturbing. Now, she did manage to speak to Michael one more time, and she was so fascinated with this case. She kind of wanted to do an on-site investigation, but she knew that it would be difficult because he'd have to get permission from his employer, and she just couldn't see it happening. But essentially, he disappeared. He changed all his contact information. She wasn't able to reach him again, and she felt really sorry because she could hear this real fear and the burden of loneliness that these encounters cause for these eyewitnesses because they can't share it with anyone.
Yeah, I've never thought about that, but only recently it has crossed my mind that it's like we talk about these stories on the show all the time, but the one thing that I've noticed is that because we don't experience them, it's like it's very easy to describe it until you're actually undergoing it and going through this kind of experience. And this is only recently we were talking about a researcher who said, it's one thing to see it and talk about it. Sorry, it's one thing to talk about it, but it's an entirely other thing to interact with it. And the story that you're describing there, Ben, is kind of consistent with a number of things. It sounds like he may have been caught up in something known as dimensional sickness, which I'll explain in the plus extension coming up, or there's more of the folkloric kind of vampire style or energy vampire style kind of stuff that's coming up in there as well. There's this draining that happens. There's this illness that comes about when people interact with these entities. So I would be fascinated to know, and maybe this is something that she might incorporate into her research or come across by herself, what was he doing beforehand? Because what's really consistent, we tend to think with these experiences for most people that it's a random event that takes place. It just happens to be random. But you'll find if you dig a little bit deeper with many people that have these experiences that are genuine experiences, that they've been dabbling in something. And as I said at the start of the show, you don't actually have to be drawing a pentagram on your basement floor. It could just be that you've suddenly gone, oh.
It helps, though.
It helps. It absolutely helps. But perhaps you've suddenly gone, oh, I'm interested in ghosts for some reason, or I'm interested in this, and you go and buy a couple of books, and you start reading these books. That's all it takes. It's like this weird gateway drug to accessing these things. It's almost like once you believe or even entertain the possibility that these things exist, they're there.
From all the information we have, he just wasn't interested in anything like that. But of course, we don't know.
We don't know. And people also are reluctant to talk about that kind of stuff anyway.
The note she said at the end of this case, and the thing to remember was that the entity was surprised that the eyewitness could see it. And she says this indicates the possibility that the entity had been in similar situations with humans, but always went undetected.
Where don't the jinn normally show up in bathrooms?
That's where they hang out.
Yeah.
And the witness also experienced fear and lasting anxiety over his encounter. He stated often during our interview, she said, that he constantly worried they would return for him. But I mean, maybe this is just an entity. This is some kind of alien that also just wanted some privacy. Like maybe he really needed to do a big number 2 and someone else was in the bathroom and that's why he was freaking out because he just, you know how sometimes you can't go when there's someone else around.
Do you think he's like got an apprehensive pee or something?
Yeah.
It's like he's scared that someone's going to knock.
He teleported into the human bathroom because he thought it's late, there's no one around.
No, if you can teleport, you'd just teleport the poop out of your backside.
It's like when you're out shopping, like you don't want to do a poop at the supermarket toilet. Like you want to go home to where it's nice and comfortable.
That is true. Yeah, I think that's universal. I get it.
That's the thing. It's like he wasn't comfortable, so he had to teleport into the nice, clean. Like maybe that's where he goes every night at 1 a.m. The alien teleports in. He's like, "This is my spot."
Maybe, but I think your argument's undermined because if you've got teleportation technology, you can teleport anywhere.
No, but that's his spot. They just happen to be working late that night. I think it's a reasonable theory. I'm going to email her.
Great. Yeah, you email with that. That would go down really well.
I'm going to email her.
Benjamin from Mysterious Universe. What do you think about it pooping?
Angelia Shear with the book UFO Encounters, How High Strange Events Transform Human Perception. That's available now. I'll link to it in the show notes. I've got more stories from that if we have time for them in the Plus extension. But coming up after the break, Aaron's going to lay it out. The Japanese curse, the weird men in black and their weird children.
The dabbling in the paranormal, simply looking into something causes you to light up like a beacon on the etheric plane and they want you. For what purpose, we don't know, but in a lot of these cases, it doesn't end well. They drain you, they destroy your lives, and in some cases, they can even kill you. So I'm going to go into those stories. I'm going to go into a really strange Men in Black tale that I've never heard before, but it's particularly interesting because, first of all, the Men in Black is anti-Semitic. I don't know.
What?
Yeah, it's weird. I mean, it's abhorrent, but it's also really weird because if you're a man in black, why would you be concerned about human affairs and have any prejudices? But apparently in this case, he's dreadfully anti-Semitic, but it ends up creating this extra additional layer of high strangeness that already exists with the Men in Black phenomenon. Like, it's just weird how upset he is about human affairs, and it results in a new angle on what the Men in Black possibly could be.
Anti-Semitic Men in Black, $9 a month, helps support your favourite show.
By the way, we're not endorsing it. That's really important. I'm not endorsing the anti-Semitic Men in Black.
I think that's implied. MysteriousUniverse.org/plus for all the details. Check it out. You get access to the big extensions we do every single Friday, and you get exclusive shows on Tuesday. We have a concurrently running season that's exclusive to Plus members, and you're getting all the extra content. If you sign up for Plus, you're getting double the amount of content we put out on these free shows. Sign up today, MysteriousUniverse.org/plus, $9 a month, help support your favorite show. You also get a higher quality audio version of the show, a higher quality feed. You get a totally ad-free experience on the show. You get discounts off digital products in our store. Again, all the details are at MysteriousUniverse.org/plus. That's a wrap for this free edition of the show. Thanks for listening. If you're on Plus, stick around for the great stuff after the break. For everyone else, we'll catch you next week. Welcome back to your Plus extension. Great to have you with us.